I wanted to talk about the whole Ukrainian thing a little bit. I saw that
What's new? Fill me in as though I don't know
it's a big deal.
anything of the past couple months.
It's a really big deal. So there's been this squabbling from the beginning between the United States and the European allies about who's going to send what, and how is it going to get financed, and will you do it first? You know, because it's like if the U.S. gives them rifles, then it's perfectly fine for Poland to give them rifles. Russia's not going to single out Poland now and be like, "Ah, you gave them rifles, you're next." They'll be like, "No, the U.S. gave them rifles." It's kind of like anything the U.S. will do, everybody else is like, all right, that's the new line. We can do that now. It's all good. And it was everything up on 2 tanks until like a week ago, maybe a couple days ago. And they were talking about Bradley vehicles, which are like armored US fighting vehicles. They have, I guess, is it a 25 millimeter cannon? Something like that. It's a
With the
badass
uranium depleted
vehicle,
shells.
but
Things
it's
that
not a
aren't
tank.
tanks are
Um,
Oh,
close to
it's like an
tanks.
APC, MRAP,
Yeah.
something like that.
Looks like a
Yeah,
tank.
there's so many designations and people get butt hurt, so I don't even get try to get specific. But
In a movie,
but
it'd be a
anyway,
tank.
they changed their mind, and the U.S. had said we're not going to send M1 Abrams tanks, not only because mostly because they mentioned the upkeep and everything that's required to keep them operational in the field. You have to have a lot of infrastructure and a lot of experts and a lot of people working on them continuously. You have to have parts there and all that stuff. But then they just changed their fucking mind and said they're going to send 31 M1 Abrams tanks, and Germany was like, "Oh, really? Well, we'll send a few Leopard tanks." And not only that, anybody else who has Leopard tanks that wants to send some, go ahead. And so there's plenty of countries who have Leopard tanks, older ones.
Are those our best tanks? Are
The M1
Kind
so
of.
we're going to send the version of our tanks that has the newest targeting stuff, the newest scopes and all that stuff. The thing they're not getting, and it's the thing that no one gets, is our fancy armor. We've got this depleted uranium armor and we don't ship that out to anybody. That the only people operating those tanks are Americans.
So none of us are tank experts, but I've been coming up to
No.
speed on this too. The M1 Abrams is particularly hard to maintain. It has a turbine engine,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it runs on jet fuel.
It
Like,
does.
you could take your average jackass who maintains his own dirt bike, ask him to work on a diesel engine, and he'll be like, "All right, I understand like 30% of this, 50% of it." You put him on a fucking jet engine, turbine, jet fuel burning, whatever, and it's like, I don't even get it. How does it start? How do you convert a turbine into like treads
Yeah.
moving? The whole thing is confusing to me. And I can't be alone in that people starting to maintain these tanks like understand it even less than
You're not. I think there's a reason, though, and this is my tinfoil hat conspiracy reason. I think it's very obvious that we're getting amazing field data and testing data from all of our, maybe not cutting edge, but maybe just barely behind current generation tech to see how it fared. And the same kind of thing with the tanks. It's like, well, people have been complaining these tanks are hard to maintain. Let's see how they do in a shit environment. Let's send them to Ukraine and get some data.
These tanks were designed from the get-go to fight Russians in Eastern Europe. That's what they're
Really?
for. They're fucking
Okay.
that's what they're all about. So now it's like, oh shit, there's Russians fighting in Eastern Europe. You think these will help? Yeah, I do. I think they'll make a huge difference. And
Yeah,
it's
it was an
not as
interesting.
many tanks as you'd think. That America's sending 31 tanks.
Yeah,
And I think the UK is sending 16 and someone else is sending
It
16.
seems like a decent amount.
Okay, well, maybe my numbers are low. I'm like 31 tanks. Don't they fight like, I don't know, 10 at a time or something? I'm not sure how this works.
yeah,
But
it seemed like it, right? Like we
Oh.
looked at how like those armored divisions were made up, and if memory serves,
probably
it's like
wrong.
10 tanks and then like 30 of those APC type vehicles, and then like 300 men. I think that's essentially what it is, roughly speaking.
To me, I'm like, does 30 tanks turn the tide? Because the news is acting like it is. Now let's make it 60 because let's pretend the
Mhm.
Leopard is just as good. I don't know.
Yeah.
But let's do 60 tanks turn the tide? I'm not sure. One interesting thing about tanks is so far we've sent mostly defensive weapons, right? And the artillery is defensive, the guns that
Well,
well, I know there's a fine line between defensive and offensive, but tanks are meant to advance your troops, to take back the land. And it's going to be a little while. Kyle mentioned that there's a lot of training and logistics that needs to happen. So they're not going to have the tanks in 2 weeks, but they're talking about like, hey, as we enter spring and the ground gets less muddy and they can start moving forward, that's when these tanks are really going to make a difference. Another reason that we've held up, aside from the logistics, is Russia's saber rattling, maybe. Like, it seemed like first we give them guns and Russia's like, you sure you want to fuck with this? And then we give them like bigger guns and javelins, and Russia's like, I don't know, I'm thinking about a nuclear option. And then we give them a HIMARS, and Russia's like, I really think I should like press the button. And now we give them tanks, just boiling this frog slowly. I don't know what's after tanks. What
jets,
drones? Jets come after tanks.
Right?
The spring is going to be interesting, right? Because not only is the snow going to presumably go away and the ice thaw out so they can actually move around and maneuver, but they called up that second group of 500,000 Russians. That'll be there in the spring. And one thing the UK has been doing in particular is they fly 10,000 Ukrainians to the UK every month, and they train them on tanks and shit, like getting them up to NATO spec on all the weapon platforms. And then every month they send 10,000 more battle-hardened, battle-trained Ukrainians back home, and they know how to use the shit now. And there's going to be, 60,000 more of those type of troops on the battlefront for Ukraine by the time spring comes around. But again, 500,000 more Russians, 60,000 more Ukrainians, plus all the American intelligence and hardware that we can give away.
What's happened with the battle line, the map control?
I watch this every day, and it's, to me, like my amateur ass looking at it, much ado about nothing. Like, it literally, like, the Russians took a kilometer and they took this village, and I look at the village and it's like my guest house and stable is as significant as this bullshit Ukrainian village. Like,
they ain't got Wendy's there.
The Woodworth residence has been seized by Putin.
I have as much square footage as that fucking village does. Like, why are I watching this news from 6,000 miles away? I don't know. And like, again, a kilometer. Like, these lines are not moving in any significant way in the wintertime, it seems to me.
I guess that makes sense.
There was movement in the Wagner group. I don't know if you guys saw that. If I'm remembering this correctly, one of their commanders defected to, was it Finland, Sweden? It was one of those countries. And he tried to make a deal to offer to get amnesty in exchange for evidence for war crimes. And there was also issue with the Wagner group and the Russian government. But for those of you that are watching, the Wagner group is mercenaries, if I'm not mistaken. And they were complaining about being ill-equipped. Like, one time they showed up and there were guns, but the ammo shipment was 2 days late. So just had to sit there and wait and do nothing, and terrifying stuff like that, which begs the question. The expensive PMCs are not being well equipped. We know the grunts aren't well equipped. And you talk about that nuclear option. What me and my friends and a lot of other people speculate is, what if Russia's nuclear options are way weaker than we think they are? I guess it doesn't take many to end the world, but if they say, oh, we've got 10,000 nukes, what if it's really like 40 that are really functional and good?
I think it's my numbers are probably bad, but I think it's around 4,500 or 5,000 or something like that we each have. They have slightly more than us. I was watching a whole thing about this earlier today. It's weird. Like we signed this whole treaty against having any sort of like blanket missile defense, because both parties need to be vulnerable for there to be mutually assured destruction, right? One of us can't have an overshield, and but you hope that we built one anyway, right? You hope that we don't keep our word all the time, right? I want my government to be honest to a point.
Dude,
it's
countries
just
don't
as likely that America has shit that we haven't told them about as it does that Russia pretended to have shit that they don't really have. Like, that's the mismatch.
I love it.
There's no way either side stopped developing that. They're like, all right, like fingers crossed behind their back.
Like, I can believe that Russia didn't develop it.
Like, no, not like they did it, but like they definitely keep trying to do that shit. They just keep it under wraps.
I think you've got like people
because they'd want to get the edge on the US.
They'd want to put those resources into their own pocket, buy a fucking yacht, and pretend they did it. Like that turns out why that's a part of why the Russian army is so weak. That those bullets they don't have, that the uniforms, the winter clothing that they don't have, it's because some asshole at the top bought a boat.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
everything that they're fighting with is stuff that was paid for by the Soviet Union in the 80s. And almost nobody has the new stuff because they're all in the boat, like you said.
Yeah.
All the resources, I should say. I don't imagine you can make a good boat out of guns. I'm imagining a bunch of AKs welded together into a giant yacht that, well, that would still float if it displaces enough water.
That'd be a sick one. But well, with all these, I've been playing lots of RTS, so I know those tanks are going to be incredibly beneficial for establishing map control for the Ukrainians. They're going to be able to push in. They're going to be able to distract over here and then pop, going around the side. Don't get me in the mix. I've been playing so much AoE too. I'm still bad, but like I'm getting better at it. And
Taylor, seriously though, can't a tank occupy a town? Like, couldn't one tank reasonably occupy a small town of people that only have small arms?
I imagine so. Yeah, I mean they can't stop like actual shit and guerrilla stuff from going on, but it would be enough to be like, yeah, you can't drive your armored, death style truck through the road anymore.
So Drifter phrased the question in a clever way. Like, can a tank hold a town when they all have only small arms? Sure, hypothetically, but these people are supplied by a motivated NATO, and there's a javelin behind every tree.
Oh, I thought he was talking
maybe
about,
tanks aren't that useful.
In the other way, like the Ukrainian tank sitting in the or the leopard sitting in the village. Like,
yeah, right.
Oh, okay. A tank can absolutely hold that village. Woody, could a tank hold your property?
Yeah, my best gun's like.
Jackie's like, is he still there? And he's like, he's still there. Yeah, the tank guy's still there. Go out and talk to him. You go fucking talk to him. I'm not talking to the tank guy. He's got one of those Russian hats on. No, fuck you. I'm not doing that.
I've been watching these YouTube videos about, I don't know, a couple of the different world wars, but also about the Cold War. And I watched some good stuff about the Cold War submarine stuff today. And this naval intelligence guy it's fun they have Russians and like US naval intelligence being interviewed from the shit they did in the 70s and 80s. And it's funny to see these sailors still kind of be like, well, maybe this happened. And then there were some people, who knows where they came from, but they were sympathetic to the situation, whoever they were. They talk like that a lot. And the US guy was like, we wanted to humiliate them whenever we could, because we knew we were better. We were so far ahead. Our technology was just so much better. So, there came a time when a Russian nuclear submarine just ran aground, and on their screens, it looked like clear channels ahead. Everything was all good for some reason. We don't know why. And it just, it ran into Norway. It was like, Norway. I was like, really? That happened? And then they like show the newspaper articles and like the
Kursk or something. What was it called? Do you remember?
That was one of the disasters. I can't identify them by name. And they talked about the first nuclear American submarine. It was, the first one ever wasn't an American one. And the Russian was like, our scientists told us it had to be lies. They said, a nuclear reactor, that's the size of a city block almost. No, you don't put that in a submarine. But they had.
That's a big win.
Yeah.
If you were watching that, did they have Stanislav Petrov's story from the Soviet Union?
I wouldn't know it by his name. What
he was the guy who's broadly credited for saving the world. He was working at one of their detection facilities. An engineer, he helped design it. And their facility detected a nuclear missile being launched at Moscow. And he said, it's really weird. They're launching one, and then another one showed up, and I think maybe a third one. And he, in his role of overseeing the facility that he helped created, was supposed to call the Kremlin and give them an opportunity for a counterattack. Mm-hmm. And he said that he just didn't believe that America would send such a small attack, but he knew the guy that he would call was a war hawk and would inevitably start a nuclear war. And he said he just didn't want to be responsible, even though one of the missiles was coming for his facility. He said that he just totally lied and said, oh, guys, it's a system error here. It's just one of those bugs. Don't worry about it. Don't call it in. It did turn out to be a system error, but he didn't know that at the time. And he got thoroughly punished and demoted and sent out to Siberia for that one.
That guy's a hero. That would be.
It's probably
What
all
a
lies that he
horrible
told. He
situation to
got
be
caught
in.
fucking a general's daughter or something like that. He's like, no, I saved the world, please.
Saved the world.
Fuck.
Well, he'd make up a different lie that didn't make him look like he almost betrayed the Soviet Union to serve America.
Oh, see, that was a cover story.
It's like, no, it looks like they were going.
I guess the U.S. Navy had or has this submarine with wheels. So they bring
That's
it
a
down
step
the
back.
ocean. No.
That's a
It's not.
of submarines
So-
and how they work.
Yeah, and it travels by road quickly across.
It's technically amphibious.
Yeah.
So it's for doing like sneaky underwater stuff, like messing with cables and the infrastructure underwater. So they just drive up to whatever they want to fuck with and park. And it doesn't matter what the water currents do, because they're sat there, and then they're sending divers out to like go fuck with stuff. They I guess the Navy had this entire there was this huge incident. I think it was Sweden, I think. Yeah, it's Sweden, where Swedish waters were being penetrated by Soviet submarines, and it was a huge problem. It was news stories. The public was told to spot them and report them. People were on the beaches with binoculars. They were depth charging them from the skies, and they had depth charges planted all along the ocean floor. So if they heard the boat near one of those, they could push a button like Battleship and detonate a charge that was already there. Well, they hear it. They hear the click, 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 click. They're, oh fuck, hit the big one. So this one guy hits the biggest mine ever, apparently, and they fuck up the nuclear submarine. And it turns out that what was going on is that the British and the Americans were terrorizing the Swedish to make them not like the Soviets very much.
No.
So they damaged one of those submarines.
That.
Who knows what kind? But when our submarines get hurt, they release this like green goo that floats to the top in case they need to be rescued. It like makes a pool of green goo, and like right there in the goo. And that's apparently only NATO vessels would do that. But anyway, they went through this long story of how through chain of command, this guy was in charge of the defense, and he was like, I wanted to detonate the whole ocean floor. I wanted to set them all off. And they said, you only have permission to set off one. And I couldn't understand. He's like, now I understand. I was a useful fool, and I was played. Because
I was technically a terrorist. Like
they let the Americans or the British, whomever it was, like just leave. They were like, yeah, just chill. But the whole thing was blamed on the Russians. It was this huge international incident the Russians were constantly denying. I really like those History Channel like YouTube channels. I think the one I've been watching is called Dark Skies or something. They often add kind of a dark like spin on historical events. It's like, but little did they know the Americans were 2 steps ahead. You're like, oh, what'd they do?
When I listen
Cold War
to
stuff is amazing.
War stories, one time out of 3, I feel like we're really the good guys. But that track record makes it hard to really buy into us being good.
When were the bad guys? When were we the most bad guy-ish?
Recently, I don't like that I invaded Iraq on the weapons of mass destruction thing.
Liberated.
1 million Iraqis died, I'm told. Thousands of Americans died. And they had no proof of weapons of mass destruction, yet did it anyway. The proof they put in a single capital punishment case, like the I's they dot and T's they cross, is so much higher than what they put for killing 1 million Iraqis. And this might be, now I'm going off the rails. I honestly think that the assassination attempt on Bush Sr. is a big motivator for why America actually attacked Iraq. Bush
No,
Jr.
sir.
Okay, again,
Hard disagree. If I'm pulling memories here, which have been damaged, I think Saddam Hussein was working on a way to export oil to Europe. So it would be, we have the petrodollar, where OPEC and Saudi Arabia and a lot of these countries trade oil only on the US dollar,
right,
or with the US dollar. Saddam wanted to bust that up and get a euro oil trade going on. And the Bush administration had this invasion plan on the desk since like 92, ready to go.
Yeah. I mean, the same thing happened with Muammar Gaddafi. He wanted to send oil from Libya and to do it on the euro. And
the US dollar is kind of how big business is done. And anytime someone wants to change that fact, the U.S. gets awful fighty.
Yeah, they fall down stairs, they fall out of windows, they fall on
Yeah.
their own knife collection. They have a heart attack. It's just so tragic.
Sometimes
God
they
punishes
stab
those.
themselves to death.
Oh.
Can you imagine?
I hate these assholes that shoot themselves in the head 3 times.
Yeah, in the back of the head twice, in like the trunk of his own car. Like the most complicated
like a suicide
suicide
to me.
ever.
Yeah.
It's like, what do you do? How?
Or don't forget the guy that exposed the Iran-Contra scandal, where the CIA was trading drugs to fund the Contras in South America. He died of not long afterwards.
Yeah. Had you ever see the video? We've talked about this is many years ago. We talked about it on the show. I found this from like O&A, Opie and Anthony. They were watching this clip from like the late 80s, early 90s of this dude in like California who invented an engine that ran on water. And he was like, it's not that powerful, but there's lots of places to go from here. If you have tap water, that'll run it. Distilled water will run it. You don't have water, use snow, let it melt. That'll run it. Ice can run it, let it melt. And like, it was a local news story covering him, like Steve Meyer's brand new fuel cell could revolutionize energy use. And he died of being poisoned. He was eating at a restaurant and he got up and ran outside and said, I've been poisoned. And then he died. And
it was actually poison.
Okay. Like, I mean, he didn't get a ton of attention, but yeah, he had a water fuel cell. And then he was so excited about it that he had to poison himself at Applebee's or whatever. Like, oh, it just, as I was watching the clip, like from like 92 or whatever, it's like, this guy don't fucking talk about this, man. Like why would you bring, you got to know
that
this
might have
isn't
just
cool.
been Applebee's.
It was Applebee's taking him
Something wrong with that microwave there. But a lot of people that worked on electric, water, or hydrogen cars, there was a huge number of them that died of accidents, and very few products ever came to market. A lot of products, the notes were destroyed. So many weird, like dozens. I couldn't even list specific ones. There's probably a Wikipedia page that lists all the people that were working on water-powered cars that committed.
Yeah. Dude, Stanley Meyer.